bring it forward then as an original thesis that Mr. Hopper, surrounding himself with witnesses...
In the late 1950s, before he became president, Senator Jack Kennedy and his brother Bobby interrogated Mafia racketeers. Sam Giancana, however, seemed unafraid. He was used to owning politicians, and the Kennedys, he thought, would be no different, just bigger flies in his web. Joe Kennedy, the boy's father, was a veteran like himself of bootlegging days. Joe Kennedy made part of his fortune smuggling whiskey. In the late 1950s, Giancana claimed that at this hotel in Chicago, Joe Kennedy asked for his help. He wanted his son Jack to run for president. Could Giancana use his corrupt political power to swing the vote in Chicago or anywhere else?
At that meeting, Joe Kennedy specifically told my uncle that if he does this for him and Jack Kennedy is elected, if he helps him get Jack Kennedy elected, that Sam Giancana will have the ear of the president, that they would be able to have business the way they really wanted it, that they could have the government off their back.
Did you say that SOB, I'll break his back?
Jack's brother Bobby Kennedy laid into Mafia leaders and their union friends with messianic zeal.
After these people testified before the committee.
Tracked down in Las Vegas, Giancana was subpoenaed and torn into by Bobby Kennedy, who would eventually become his mortal enemy.
Would you tell us whether if you have opposition from anybody that you dispose of them by having them stuffed in a trunk? Is that what you do, Mr. Giancana?
Decline to answer because I honestly believe my answer might tend to incriminate.
Will you tell us anything about any of your operations, or you just giggle every time I ask you a question?
Decline to answer because I honestly believe my answer might tend to incriminate me.
I thought only little girls giggled, Mr. Giancana.
Giancana seemed oddly unruffled. In the Las Vegas underworld, rumors of a behind-the-scenes deal with the Kennedys didn't surprise businessman Ed Becker.
Because they were tied in. Joe Kennedy was tied in with the mob.
Joe Kennedy had tied his sons into the world of Sam Giancana.
By osmosis, yes.
Giancana really imagined he owned the Kennedys.
That's what we were led to believe.
Who led you to believe that?
Sam,
We've got the Kennedys.
they're in our pocket. We own them. What other guy could you rather have in your pocket but the president? Me, I thought it was a little ridiculous that, but then again, hey, if this is possible, we got a hell of a thing going.
Joe Kennedy understood the power of organized crime to mobilize votes and fix results. In New York, in the 1960 election year, he was reportedly seen lunching with a succession of top mobsters. FBI files record similar meetings. If he did seek the mob's help in the election of his son, Joe Kennedy made the most dangerous deal imaginable.
Sure, because you're dealing with psychopathic people.
Who believe that they are critical to your election.
Absolutely. There's no free lunch in the mob.
Just before the election, the Chicago wards he'd most thoroughly corrupted, Giancana sent out his soldiers to rustle up votes for Kennedy.
We were told by Sam to go out there and get all the Italian people and the Irish and the Polacks and get their votes, tell them what the Kennedys could do for us, that we needed this guy in the office. I never let them know that it would help organized crime, but I just let them know that it would be good for them. So we went out there and we pushed for votes. We sent people out, all the old greaseballs and Polacks, we sent them all out there, we talked to people, and they all voted for Kennedy.
The election was incredibly close. Nationally, Kennedy scraped in by 0.1%.
He was ecstatic. He says, I got that man his vote.
The state of Illinois was critical, and Kennedy won it by just 9,000 votes.
Senator Kennedy will be the next president of the United States.
Victory, Giancana believed, belonged to him. Whether Giancana actually tipped Kennedy's election is one of the imponderables of history. The point is, he thought he did.
And the CIA then requested that Marilyn Monroe be eliminated. And Sam Giancana accepted the contract to kill Marilyn Monroe.
A startling underworld biography called Double Cross claims Marilyn Monroe was murdered by a mob boss. Entertainment Tonight has the story for this Monday, February 17th, 1992.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Entertainment Tonight. I'm John Tesh.
And I'm Mary Hart. The untimely death of actress Marilyn Monroe almost 30 years ago was officially pronounced a probable suicide. But an explosive biography of underworld kingpin Sam Giancana claims the mob boss murdered Monroe at the request of the CIA. Today's Inside Story relates another explosive chapter from the new book, Double Cross. Blonde bombshell Marilyn Monroe's death in 1962 of an overdose of barbiturates was ruled a probable suicide. Now the shocking claim has come out that her death was a mob hit ordered by the CIA. In the book Double Cross, the story of Chicago gangster Sam Mooney Giancana, written by his brother Chuck and godson Sam, Marilyn Monroe is depicted as having scandalous affairs with John and Robert Kennedy and having access to information damaging to the CIA. According to nephew Sam Giancana, the mob and the government both had Monroe under surveillance.
Everyone was watching her because she was perhaps a loaded gun waiting to go off. Well, once she decided that she was going to go public, the CIA said, we cannot have her do that. And the CIA then requested that Marilyn Monroe be eliminated. And Sam Giancana accepted the contract to kill Marilyn Monroe.
No comment.
Giancana's relationship to the CIA goes back to 1960 when they asked him to kill Fidel Castro. According to the book, Giancana had men try to poison Castro, but the Cuban leader had all his food and drink sampled by political prisoners. Even though those attempts were unsuccessful, the book claims the mobster's ties to the CIA continued to grow, and the CIA called him in to kill Monroe. At the same time, Giancana hoped to embarrass Monroe's lover, Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, who was hounding Giancana and the mob. Giancana states that he sent his assassins to Monroe's house. They waited until she was alone.
They taped her mouth and inserted a doctored Nembutal suppository.
The book states the suppository was from the same chemist who'd concocted the poison for the failed Castro attempts. This time the dose was lethal.
A suppository was very fast-acting, like an injection. There was no traces of that sedative suppository. So it was a well-designed method of killing Marilyn Monroe.
The book claims that Giancana did get evidence of Bobby Kennedy coming to Monroe's house before the murder, but that the whole conspiracy was covered up by the government so quickly that his scheme to embarrass Kennedy failed. This whole theory has Monroe scholars up in arms. James Spada, Monroe biographer and expert, has problems with some of the story.
Number one, Mrs. Murray, her housekeeper, was there, sleeping in the next bedroom. Had there been a struggle, which must have been accompanied by screams, she certainly would have heard it.
But the Giancanas stand by their story, pointing to a long history of mob and CIA involvement with Monroe. According to the book, Monroe owed her superstar career to the mob, who helped her when she was a rising star.
Johnny Roselli saw her, Johnny Roselli being a liaison in Chicago that reported directly to Mooney. They saw her, thought that she obviously had great potential, and would invest in promoting her career behind the scenes.
The book also claims that the CIA used Monroe as a sexual pawn in their dealings with foreign leaders.
She could be used to compromise world leaders, specifically Sukarno of Indonesia. They used Marilyn Monroe to get him in a compromising position to make sure that he did what the CIA wanted him to do.
Monroe's sexual activities even extended to Mooney Giancana himself. Their love encounter occurred at the Cal Neva Lodge at Lake Tahoe. Mooney describes her, quote, draped nude across her bed, running her hands enticingly along her thighs, end quote.
He told my father specifically that he had slept with her on more than one occasion, and there's no reason to believe otherwise.
This story is backed up by former FBI agent Bill Romer, who had Giancana's office bugged at the time.
We listened to him as he talked to Roselli, talking about how he had had sex at Lake Tahoe on the weekend before she died.
The Giancanas say this is one of the saddest stories they've uncovered in their research because Monroe was merely an unwitting political and sexual toy.
She became
the quintessential victim. And as many tragedies as we discuss in Double Cross, I think she is probably the most tragic situation.
Double Cross should be in bookstores by the end of the week.
While Double Cross suggests Marilyn Monroe fell victim to the mob, it implicates others in her demise as well. Among them, President John Kennedy's brother Bobby, Attorney General of the United States.
The book claims that Marilyn Monroe was passionately in love with Robert Kennedy and was going to go public with their affair.
There's been a lot of speculation that perhaps Bobby Kennedy wanted her killed, or that his hand helped kill her and so forth, but that's not the case. Mooney seized this opportunity to try to entrap Bobby Kennedy in the death of Marilyn Monroe. The outfit could have taken any time they wanted to literally kill Marilyn Monroe. They selected a time precisely on the heels of when Bobby Kennedy was there.
According to the book, the mob had been bugging Monroe's house, and they were listening the night of her death to discover when Bobby Kennedy would arrive. Quoting from the book now, Bobby Kennedy finally did appear at Marilyn's home late on Saturday, accompanied by another man. Listening in on the conversation, Giancana's men ascertained that Marilyn was more than a little angry at Bobby. She became agitated, hysterical in fact, and in response they heard Kennedy instruct the man with him, evidently a doctor, to give her a shot to calm her down. Shortly thereafter, the Attorney General and the doctor left, end quote. Then the killer struck, but all evidence of the killing disappeared, and Giancana couldn't use his own taped evidence implicating the Attorney General.
The CIA stepped in and said, you can't use that information because literally you will be divulging her relationship with you, likewise her relationship with us, and it would again cause a great deal of problems. So they told Mooney at that time, you can't use the information.
According to Giancana, that information included the fact that, quote, Kennedy had panicked at the prospect of being charged with the starlet's murder and implicated as Monroe's sexual playmate. He directed Peter Lawford and Detective Fred Otash to sweep the house before the authorities arrived, leaving little of substance that would implicate Bobby Kennedy, end quote.
On tomorrow's show, the authors of Double Cross say Sam Giancana played a major role in the assassination of President Kennedy.
Today we continue our special series based on Double Cross, the explosive biography of former underworld kingpin Sam Giancana and his influence on show business and politics. As we've reported, the book claims Giancana was involved in the deaths of Marilyn Monroe and President John Kennedy. In today's Inside Story, Double Cross relates that Giancana's influence on the Kennedys goes back to Joseph Kennedy, the family patriarch. Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger in the 1920s with gangster connections, according to the book Double Cross, and his relationship with the mob continued into the 50s. But then Kennedy tried to sever his mob ties because of his son John's rising political career. When Joe Kennedy refused to deal with New York mob boss Frank Costello, a contract was put out on his life. So he turned to powerful Chicago mob head Sam Mooney Giancana, says Giancana's nephew.
Since Mooney was the recognized power in the country outside of New York, he was the only one of stature who could get this contract removed, Mooney said that he would get the contract removed. And Joe Kennedy promised that Mooney would obviously have the ear of the next president of the United States.
The book claims Giancana met with John Kennedy in 1959 and extracted a promise from him that government pressure on organized crime would ease up, pressure that was spearheaded by Robert Kennedy and a Senate committee investigating the mob. In return for that promise, Giancana said he used labor unions, ballot box stuffing, and mob muscle to help get JFK elected in 1960. But once he won, the president and his then Attorney General brother Bobby reneged on the deal. To Mooney, this was the ultimate double cross. Kennedy was also making enemies elsewhere.
As a result of the Bay of Pigs fiasco, Jack Kennedy had alienated members of the CIA, had threatened to splinter the organization in 1,000 pieces. And so what you had happening in the early 60s was several groups of people who all had a reason to want Jack Kennedy out of the way.
Giancana claims the CIA came to him for help in the assassination of Kennedy, as they had previously in trying to assassinate Fidel Castro in Cuba. This story makes sense, says mob expert and writer David Scheim.
I found that a lot of what he said is credible. I found particularly talking about the Mafia and the CIA worked very closely is something that has come out of other Chicago people.
Professor Robert Blakey, another expert on the mob and on the assassination, says he's not sure Giancana was involved, but knows that many organized crime figures wanted Kennedy killed.
They hated Robert Kennedy. They hated Jack Kennedy. They expressed disdain for them. They even discussed, in a general sort of way, he ought to be whacked out.
Could the mob send Oswald to Russia and get him back?
Oliver Stone's film points to CIA involvement in the assassination, and director Stone says the mob was probably there too.
We always took the Mafia into account and always considered it sort of a junior member of the CIA.
From a fifth-floor window at 12:30 p.m., the rifle shots that bring death to President Kennedy.
Giancana told his brother Chuck that he brought in 2 men from Chicago to be actual gunmen in the killing. Lee Harvey Oswald, however, was a CIA man, and Jack Ruby, who later killed Oswald, had been Giancana's man in Dallas for years, running a mob-owned nightclub since the late 40s.
When Jack Ruby entered the police building that morning and shot Lee Harvey Oswald, that put Chicago right in the middle of the conspiracy and the assassination, because Jack Ruby reports to Chicago.
The most startling accusation in the book is that both Vice President Lyndon Johnson and future President Richard Nixon knew about the assassination in advance.
Specifically, he mentioned that he had seen them, met with them, and that they were aware of it. And certainly Johnson had something to gain by Jack Kennedy's removal, and it was no secret that Richard Nixon and affiliations with mob organizations for many years.
The book does not elaborate on Nixon's involvement, and the former president had no comment on the book.
The flowers Mrs. Kennedy carried from the airport are twisted and torn.
Chuck Giancana says in the book that he wishes his brother had never told him about the assassination. Quote, Chuck realized he hated Mooney for telling the truth. Chuck felt he would now live forever in the shadow of fear. He even wondered how Mooney could have shared it, knowing it might jeopardize his life. End quote. An exclusive Entertainment Tonight Us magazine poll shows that 16% of those asked believe that both Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon knew about the Giancana CIA conspiracy as claimed in Double Cross. And just over 45% of those polled said that Johnson and Nixon could have known. In answer to another poll question, over 53% believe there was some sort of conspiracy involved in the assassination of President Kennedy.